Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't really about mental illness. It was about people who notice everything others miss, and why that ability can either destroy them or turn them into something extraordinary. In his clinical practice, Jung began documenting a group of patients with what he called differentiated perception. These were individuals who could read micro-expressions, sense hidden emotions, and detect psychological patterns invisible to everyone else. They could see through social masks, catch lies instantly, and pick up on the unconscious tension in a room before anyone else had a clue. Jung called this discovery dangerous, not because these people were unstable, but because the ability itself carried a heavy psychological price. Again and again, he saw them end up isolated, exhausted, and unable to maintain normal relationships. Today, I'm going to take you inside Jung's most dangerous discovery about people who see everything, and why he believed this rare gift either breaks you apart or forces you to evolve. This story starts with one of Jung's own private case notes. In 1913, right in the middle of his own psychological crisis following the break with Freud, he began treating a highly introverted, intuitive patient. She represented what Jung would later categorize as one of the rarest personality types. She possessed what he called undifferentiated intuitive perception. This patient could walk into any space and immediately sense the psychological atmosphere. Who was lying? Who was in pain? Who was secretly resentful? Jung wrote about her. The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others. But this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage. She couldn't do small talk because she saw through every facade. Friendships fell apart because people felt exposed around her. Jobs didn't last because her very presence disrupted the unspoken agreements that hold groups together. Jung realized he wasn't treating pathology. He was observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception becomes so differentiated that it undermines social survival. She described people with startling accuracy, almost as if she could access their private thoughts and hidden motivations. Jung tested her observations carefully, and again they proved true. This wasn't psychosis. It wasn't delusion. This was consciousness so advanced it had become socially dangerous. But then Jung found something even more disturbing. Her extraordinary perception seemed impossible to explain. It wasn't just empathy. He began investigating what he would later call participation mystique, a psychological phenomenon where individuals with highly differentiated intuition are overwhelmed by unconscious material from others. In his Red Book notes, Jung wrote, "There are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment." Modern research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive persons supports Jung's early observations. About 20% of people, her research shows, have heightened sensory and emotional sensitivity. But Jung was pointing to something even rarer: the introverted intuitive type, roughly 1% of the population, who don't just feel deeply but perceive unconscious patterns with startling clarity. Jung wrote that these individuals have a differentiated intuitive function. Their minds don't only process obvious cues. They detect unconscious emotional states, repressed content, and hidden psychological patterns. They see the depression behind the forced smile. They sense desperation beneath a confident presentation. They feel the collective shadow a group is trying to ignore. And here's where the real danger begins. The problem, Jung said, isn't the perception itself. It's the psychic isolation it creates. When you can clearly see what others can't or won't see, you become a mirror society can't bear to look into. That's what he called the problem of the superior function. Your greatest strength becomes your greatest burden because it separates you from the collective unconscious. Jung also noticed another, darker dynamic. People with this gift of differentiated perception become targets of what he called shadow projection. Because they see people's unconscious contents so clearly, others unconsciously attack them for reflecting back what they don't want to see in themselves. In Psychology of the Unconscious, Jung famously wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent." But he realized this didn't just apply to parents. It extended to every relationship. When someone's shadow is reflected back through another person's clear perception, the unconscious mind has two choices: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. Jung documented this pattern again and again. The person who sees clearly gets blamed for creating the problem they're merely observing. His patients with differentiated intuition experienced this constantly. If they gently suggested someone seemed troubled, that person would explode at them for being negative. If they expressed concern about an obvious issue, they'd be accused of creating drama or judging. Jung realized this wasn't random. It was psychological defense. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for most people, it's easier to attack the person, reflecting their shadow, than to examine what's being reflected." This creates what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals often become the designated problem in every group they join, not because they cause problems, but because they reveal problems already hidden in the collective unconscious. Jung wrote, "The bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself." That's why these people don't just feel misunderstood, they feel targeted by a force they can't explain. But Jung's most disturbing discovery was still ahead. He realized overwhelming perception didn't manifest the same way in everyone. In fact, he identified 4 distinct patterns within the introverted intuitive type, 4 ways of processing unconscious content from others. Type 1. The feeling intuitive. These people combine introverted intuition with a highly differentiated feeling function. They don't just see what's happening psychologically, they feel it in their own bodies. They absorb other people's emotions so completely, they often can't tell where their own feelings end and others begin. Jung wrote, "The feeling intuitive lives in a state of perpetual emotional contagion, experiencing the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment." 6. Type 2. The thinking intuitive. These individuals see psychological patterns and predict behavioral outcomes with uncanny accuracy. They can forecast relationship failures, career disasters, and breakdowns months before they happen, not by logic, but by unconscious pattern recognition. Jung noted, they possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of unconscious processes that others cannot yet see. Type 3. The sensation intuitive. These are people who sense the physical manifestations of psychological states. They can detect illness before symptoms appear, feel someone's fatigue before it's admitted, or sense the bodily tension that signals emotional distress. Jung wrote, "These individuals serve as early warning systems for psychological and physical disease in their environment." Type 4. The pure intuitive. This was the rarest type Jung ever encountered. They combined introverted intuition with what he called an undifferentiated auxiliary function. These people saw everything, but struggled to organize or express their perceptions coherently. Instead of clarity, they lived in constant overwhelm, receiving vast amounts of unconscious material without enough psychological structure to process it constructively. Jung wrote, "They live in a state of perpetual overwhelm, receiving vast amounts of unconscious information without adequate psychological structure to process it." Understanding which type you are matters. Jung believed each requires a different path through what he called the integration challenge. But before exploring solutions, we need to understand why he considered this discovery so dangerous. He saw firsthand the devastation undifferentiated perception caused in patients' lives. And he identified 3 specific dangers that made this ability so threatening. Danger 1. Collective unconscious disruption. Jung wrote, "The individual who perceives too clearly threatens the collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends." Society, families, even workplaces depend on unspoken agreements to ignore certain truths. When someone sees through those illusions, just by existing authentically, they destabilize the group. Danger 2. Psychological isolation. This was what Jung called the problem of the superior function. The same gift that makes you perceptive also cuts you off from others, he wrote. The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it. The individual becomes an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. These individuals often report feeling as though they're living in a completely different reality from everyone else. Danger 3. Identity dissolution. Perhaps the most serious danger Jung described. People who constantly absorb unconscious content from others often lose track of their own personality. They become so flooded with external material that they can't distinguish what's theirs from what's coming in. He called this participation. Mystique, the dissolving of psychological boundaries until the individual merges with the collective unconscious. Jung warned, the danger is not merely social exile, but psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession. This is why Jung believed integrating superior perception wasn't just helpful, it was urgent. To him, it was a matter of psychological survival. He developed what he called the individuation process, a way to maintain identity while learning to engage with unconscious content. Phase 1. Recognition and differentiation. The first step was teaching his patients to recognize when they were absorbing material that wasn't theirs. He called this conscious discrimination. The ability to say, "This belongs to me. That belongs to them." He wrote, "The first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development." Jung even gave a technique: spend time alone in complete solitude each day. Let absorbed material settle until you can hear your own authentic voice. Phase 2. Shadow integration. Jung discovered that people who saw others' shadows clearly often hadn't integrated their own. If you refuse to face your own capacity for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, you'll be deeply disturbed when you see those qualities in others, he wrote. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Shadow integration means realizing you contain every human quality you observe in others. That doesn't make you broken. It makes you whole. Phase 3. Conscious participation. The final step was learning to engage with others' unconscious contents without being overwhelmed. Jung called this conscious participation, building psychological containers strong enough to hold others' material temporarily without losing yourself. He wrote, "The individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own psychological integrity." Jung knew that without this process, superior perception could easily destroy a person. To illustrate, he studied examples of both failure and success. The case of Nietzsche, unintegrated perception. Friedrich Nietzsche, the brilliant philosopher, had extraordinary perception. He saw through social, religious, and philosophical illusions with devastating clarity. But Jung argued that Nietzsche never learned integration. Instead of using his perception for healing, he wielded it as a weapon against society. His isolation and eventual breakdown, Jung said, revealed what happens when superior perception remains unbalanced. Jung wrote, Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, but he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. The case of Meister Eckhart, Successful integration. In contrast, Jung admired the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart. Eckhart had what Jung called mystical intuition, the ability to perceive realities beyond others' reach. But instead of overwhelming or isolating him, Eckhart transformed his gift into compassionate service. Jung wrote, Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. He succeeded, Jung said, because of conscious humility, recognizing superior perception as a gift to share wisely, not a weapon to wield. Jung's own struggle. Perhaps most importantly, Jung went through this himself. From 1913 to 1919, during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, Jung nearly collapsed under his own overwhelming perceptions. He later admitted, I was menaced by a psychosis and was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening to me through my work with patience. His turning point came when he realized his overwhelming perceptions weren't pathological, they were evolutionary. They represented consciousness trying to move beyond its current limits. That insight changed everything. Jung concluded that those who see too deeply, who feel too much, are not broken. They are not too sensitive or overly emotional. They are simply carrying a new form of consciousness, one that most of society isn't ready for. He wrote, the very perceptions that isolate these individuals are the seeds of humanity's future development. In other words, what feels like a curse may actually be a gift to the collective. But Jung didn't romanticize it. He was clear, without integration, the gift can destroy the person who carries it. With integration, however, it can reshape culture itself. So what does integration look like today, in the modern world? First, honoring the body. Many who carry heightened perception live in their minds, but Jung warned that embodiment is essential. The body anchors perception. Movement, breath work, even simple daily routines help prevent the flood of unconscious material from sweeping the person away. He wrote, the body is not merely the vessel of the psyche, but its grounding and its protection. Second, building symbolic language. Jung emphasized that unconscious content often arrives as symbols. Those who can't decode symbolic language feel overwhelmed. Those who can interpret symbols find clarity. Dream journaling, active imagination, even creative practices like painting or writing. These help translate unconscious floods into manageable forms. Third, community with equals, perhaps most vital. Jung argued that people with superior perception need connection with others of similar depth. Alone, they risk collapse. Together, they form what Jung called circles of consciousness, groups that protect and refine awareness. He wrote, where two or three are gathered with shared depth, there the unconscious becomes bearable. The role of the modern empath. Today, many who identify as empaths are unknowingly describing what Jung meant by superior perception. They sense emotions, tensions, even futures. Without guidance, it feels like chaos. With structure, it becomes insight. But here's the paradox Jung revealed. The very thing that makes you different, that isolates you, is the thing the world needs most. The archetypal pattern. Jung saw this not just as psychology, but as an archetypal drama, an ancient story, playing out in modern lives. The individual who perceives what others deny becomes the outsider. The prophet, the seer, the misunderstood one. Society resists them, sometimes even punishes them. But history shows that these individuals often become the carriers of new consciousness for future generations. He wrote, the one who sees differently must walk a lonelier road. But upon that road walks the future itself. A hidden responsibility. This is why Jung insisted that perception is not just a gift, it's a responsibility. You're not meant to drown in it, but to transform it. You're not meant to isolate forever, but to bring back what you've seen in ways that others can understand. It means finding language, art, or work that translates your depth into something usable for the collective. Jung's warning about power, but he also issued a caution. With perception comes the temptation to use it manipulatively, to dominate, to control, to exploit others' weaknesses. He wrote, "Superior perception is not a license for superiority. It is a call to responsibility. Without humility, the gift becomes poison." That's why humility became central to Jung's model of individuation. Those who forget humility inevitably collapse. Those who embrace it thrive. The future of sensitivity. Jung ended his writings on this topic with a prediction. He believed that sensitivity, what today we might call empathy or intuitive perception, would become more and more common as human consciousness evolves. He wrote, "What is pathology in one age may be the normal function of another." Meaning, the things that once looked like weaknesses may actually be signs of future strength. The too sensitive people of today may be prototypes of tomorrow's humanity, the final lesson. So, what do we do with this? If you find yourself resonating with Jung's descriptions, if you see, feel, and perceive more deeply than those around you, then your path is clear. Anchor yourself in your body, learn symbolic language, find circles of depth. Practice humility, transform perception into contribution. Because ultimately, Jung believed that the survival of culture depends on individuals who can carry new forms of consciousness without collapsing under them. He ended one of his lectures with this line, "The fate of humanity always rests in the hands of a few individuals who see more than the rest." That's the paradox. If you feel like you see too much, it may be because you're meant to carry what others cannot. And if you can learn to integrate it, your difference isn't a curse. It's the way forward. Closing thought. So the next time someone calls you too sensitive, too emotional, or too intense, remember Jung's insight. They're not describing your weakness. They're describing your strength. You are the living edge of human consciousness. And while that road is hard, it may also be the most important journey of all.